Good morning, everybody. Well, I guess afternoon now for those of you on the East Coast. This is Chris Lundberg. I'm one of the founders of Frakture, and I've also got Ashley Hansen here monitoring our sidebar. I think most people have joined now. Logistics-wise, if you guys are already in, you'll see a chat. We'll use chat as back channel. Go ahead and fire off any questions, any need for clarification, etc., on the webinar chat. And Ashley will respond, and we'll bring it up to the overall group as needed. We have about a 17 slides, so give or take 35, 40-minute presentation here. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end for detailed questions. But again, I would encourage you to ask questions as I'm continuing in the webinar chat, and we can use that as kind of our organizing principle for some of the chat. So with that, we're going to launch into a Frakture presentation on warehousing and the Frakture Console. So first, going to start with a quick agenda. So today, what we're going to try and cover, and hopefully we can get through most of this content. If there's a lot of questions and good questions, we can push some of it. But most of the content is going to start with a quick overview of data warehouses and bots and automation, some kind of basic concepts. For folks who are already working with Frakture, this will be some familiar territory. For some folks, it won't be, but it'll hopefully get everyone on the same page for some of what the rest of the presentation is on. The next section, we're going to cover one of our new product launches. So Frakture this quarter is launching our Frakture Console, which is the way that our clients and our organizations and our agencies can interact with their bots, with their data, with their warehouse. In the console, we're going to cover some common use cases, primarily cleaning, integrations, and reporting. With the Frakture Console, we're also launching some new standard email reporting and transactions reporting. And then we're going to get into a little, for some of the geeks, a little bit of the raw data itself and how you can see and visualize a lot of data in your warehouse. And then we'll wrap it all up with an overview of some third-party reporting, which is one of the key reasons some people might choose to use a warehouse, so they can leverage some modern reporting suites like a Google Data Studio, etc. Again, if there's any questions or problems or issues, use the chat. I'll crank on forward through the next couple slides as we kind of go through this. So, kicking it off, the Frakture, first off, is a data warehouse populated by an army of digital bots. We'll cover what each of those terms means, but if anyone's coming here not knowing where we sit in this environment, we're a warehouse and automation, a warehouse and a set of bots with it. So the first word in there is a warehouse. The word warehouse is fairly commonly used right now in different contexts. When we say warehouse, we mean a vendor-agnostic database that has information coming in from many different platforms and channels. We're not talking about a CRM, so Salesforce is not a warehouse. We're not talking about something that is provided by a company that holds your data behind a firewall that you can't get access to. We're talking about a database that you have full access to, all the information in it, that you're able to control some of the schema, some of the work behind it, and you're also able to use and manipulate data in that warehouse to your own needs. The words you'll hear with these are SQL warehouses. You might hear words like SQL Server or MySQL or Postgres or Redshift or lots of different warehouse infrastructures out there. So what you choose to base on it varies, but when we say warehouse, we basically mean something under your control that you have full access to data with, that has information coming in from multiple places. There's a lot of things that warehouses are good for. Again, we're going to cover a few of these during the presentation itself, but warehousing is a fairly new concept in that, well, it's both old and new. People have been adding data to warehouses for forever. But this idea that you might need a separate piece of technology to coordinate all of your existing platforms is fairly new. So some Fortune 500 companies have been doing it for a long time. But in the nonprofit space, the nonprofit vertical, warehousing is kind of a fairly new idea where you have this thing that is not an ECRM, that is not, again, a vendor-provided tech, that exists solely to coordinate and report on all your platforms. This is useful for a lot of reasons, but we've tried to focus folks on things like centralized data cleaning and flagging for things like GDPR and good, clean, deduped data. Things like reporting is very, very commonly used in a warehouse. Things like exploring new channels, so trying out Instagram for the first time, trying out these new social media sites for the first time is a common use of a warehouse. Because at its core, the warehouse is putting you back in control of how your data is coordinated amongst all these technologies. And in a lot of cases, automating the work that you otherwise might have had to do. So the warehouse is the database itself. But to really have value out of a database, you either need somebody on staff, so that would be like a DBA or a engineer or maybe a data scientist you might have on staff. Frakture elects to support your work with automation and with bots, meaning that we want to help you do work that otherwise a human would have had to do beforehand. So the warehouse is the database itself. The bots are doing what humans would do to get data in and out. You guys have heard of bots before. There's robots that build cars, and there's chatter bots that like interact with you while you're ordering flowers or other such things. There's Bender, there's fake fictional bots. But when we talk about bots, we think primarily about digital bots that move data between systems. So bots that might log into your CRM, schedule a report, wait for the report to complete, download the report, translate it from an Excel file into a warehouse format, and get it into the warehouse. Same thing in the reverse, where it might pull some data out of the warehouse, mash it up, clean it up, and move it over into other systems. So when we talk about bots, we're not talking about chat bots. We're not talking about the other kinds of bots. We're specifically talking about bots that push and pull data around. For the geeks on the call, it's ETL bots are very, very common. So extract, transform, load. That's our bots. That's the world our bots live in. And most of what Frakture bots are designed to do is work hand in hand with the warehouse to provide value to organizations, to automate work that otherwise humans were doing. So our bots are very, very good about things like standardizing, things like date times to make sure it's all in UTC time zones, and making sure that email addresses are cleaned up and formatted, and column headers are correct, and all that type of stuff is what our bots are very, very good at doing to get data into your warehouse in a clean, consistent fashion to be able to operate and do things on. So Frakture has existed for a few years, and we've got a number of organizations that we work with, many of the folks on the call. We realized at Frakture that we needed to offer something a little bit more than just automation, other than just clean data, and other than just being able to kind of see data going into different channels. So we've spent the last 6 months or so developing out our Frakture Console, which is our interface to view data in your warehouse. Frakture will still exist. The processes will still exist that already are there. This gives you a little more visibility into what's going on. And through the rest of the call, I'll talk a little bit about where that goes. Before I continue on some of the Frakture Console and some of the features, are there any quick questions on things like warehousing as a whole, bots in general, and kind of the automation, the kind of overview data? If not, I'll continue on to the console. Again, use the webinar chat to kick in any questions. Okay, no worries. Again, fire your questions, and we'll asynchronously handle a lot of them. So what you're looking at right now is actually one of a screenshot of the Frakture console. One of our big guiding points in the console was to give you a mental picture of what's happening with all the systems and data that you're using. Some of you might be using Frakture for only one or two, for things like maybe a CRM and maybe a social media site. Some of our clients, though, have 15 or 20 different bots which connect 15 or 20 different systems. Think peer-to-peer fundraising, think social media, think mobile commons or other mobile work, tying in legacy CRMs as well as modern information, email infrastructure, social media, online ads, Google ads, etc. As we go through these, you start to realize that warehousing is becoming more and more relevant as the number of technologies you have to use continue on the rise. At Frakture, we have about 130 bots right now. You can find some of this on our website and in some follow-up to this webinar, connecting like 130 different systems commonly used in the nonprofit and political space together into the warehouse. So a lot of our day-to-day work is identifying new software that we might want to integrate with, connecting with that data, pulling it into the warehouse, figuring out how to clean and report and work on that information. So the first thing about Frakture is just kind of an overview of that. So as a manager or as a comms director or as somebody who's in charge of all these systems, you can finally get a handle on the perhaps dozen different technologies that you're using. Without this, you would have to go to each of your team members and try to understand how they're using it, what volume of data, how much money is coming from the different systems. Frakture Console is designed to try to give you a top-level 10,000-foot overview of all of your technologies, no matter where in the organization they're working. I'm going to go through a couple examples. One is a integration example. One is a cleaning example. And then I'll get into some of the reporting on this. We do thousands and thousands of operations every day at Frakture. So these are just a couple of examples. But typically what we're trying to do is automate work that humans otherwise would have had to do. So in this particular use case you're looking at right here, one of our organizations needed to push in lapsed donors to a Facebook custom targeted audience so they could find those people online again and try to get them to re-up and start giving back again. And they also wanted to push in some activist data from one of their action tool sets so that they could follow up when somebody takes an online action. So in this particular case, we're pushing data from a CRM and an independent advocacy action toolkit both into Facebook so that they could follow up with other uses in Facebook. So what our bots do in this particular case is every single day, in fact, I think this is at about every 4 hours or so, they'll go log in and start scheduling some Pardot reports to pull down information, lapsed donor information, most recent giving history, pull that into the warehouse, and then once it's in the warehouse, we can tweak it a little bit, get rid of duplicates, do all that kind of work. And then that morning, that data will be pushed up into Facebook Business Manager for ad targeting for those particular individuals. It's a fairly custom use case, you might think, but this idea of pulling data out of system A, cleaning it a little bit, coming up with a targeting group for system B or an operation system B is fairly common. Whether you're moving mobile phone numbers from your CRM into your mobile suite, or whether or not you're pulling down data from your email system to track offline unsubscribes, et cetera. There's a lot of mechanisms that you need to move data around between these systems. So in this case, every day, we push up about 50 different targeting segments into Facebook for this organization, lapsed donors, new activists, and they can use that to then move those people up the ladder of engagement or resubscribe them if for some reason they've fallen off giving. This is one use case of integration, is pushing up targeting segments. Others are synchronizing CRMs. So if you're spinning up, say, a new CRM as you're experimenting with new CRMs, you might want to synchronize every morning all the people between the two systems so that it becomes a very easy thing to switch over. So synchronizing data between platforms is a pretty good use case of bots and Frakture. Again, if you guys do have any questions, continue on the right-hand side. I can talk all day, so I would love to hear from you guys on any questions. I briefly touched on this, but a lot of organizations realize that switching CRMs is kind of a pain. I come from a CRM background, so I'm familiar with a lot of the challenges and a lot of the issues with this. But what you're seeing right now is a Frakture Console view into one of our organizations that needed to synchronize data from a Blackbaud Luminate Online eCRM service up with their new Salesforce instance. But they didn't want to try to do it all at once and have some downtime, et cetera. So what they did is they worked with Frakture so that we would synchronize information between their CRMs. It let them try out a new database. It let them realize what the pros and cons of them. And it wasn't a 3-year process with a 1-year RFP with all these things. The CRM process started to become just a very, another component in their overall data environment. So this idea of being able to try out things with the warehouse becomes feasible and viable with bots and automation, whereas before it might not have been as viable. So again, this is another view into an example group on how you see data in the actual Frakture console. But I'm going to spend most of the balance of our time on some of the reporting that comes out of it, some of the native reporting that we're providing, as well as some of the reporting that you can get from third-party services. So reporting is one of those funny things where every system you work with, whether it be email or social media or CRMs, has reporting typically inside that system itself. And often it's good, sometimes it's bad, and occasionally it's absolutely horrible. A warehouse provides an opportunity to kind of hit the reset button on your reporting and say, you know what, we need good reporting, but we want to do reporting that is across all the different channels that we're working with, that is consistent using the same reporting suite. So I don't have to give my CFO a Luminate login to figure out how much money was raised via email, or I don't have to go in and create an Excel spreadsheet to pass on to my executive director about fundraising performance, because everything is reported out of a centralized system, out of the warehouse. I want to distinguish the data in the warehouse from the console. The data in the warehouse, freely, openly available. How you, to your organization, obviously not to the world, but to your organization. How you choose to report on that information is up to you. We've come up with some standard out-of-the-box reporting, which just comes along with Frakture. So every Frakture client gets this. It's out of the box. It's fairly straightforward. One of our reports is our standard email report you're looking at right now. Things like open rates, click rates, activity rates, subjects, dates, that type of basic email information comes out of Frakture. Now you might say, hey, well, my current email service does better than this. And you know what? You're sure right. It sure does. However, what reporting out of a warehouse does is it lets you coordinate email reporting across multiple services. You can't see this, but this email is actually reporting from two different mailers, two different outbound mailers, consolidating data into one warehouse. So one of our organizations discovered that you might want to send emails for one domain out of one email delivery service like MailChimp or something like that, and everything else out of your eCRM to improve performance across the board. To do that, you have to have one place to report on all those emails across the board, and that's where warehousing really starts to come in. So this reporting on email is cross-organization across the board. Email is fine. A lot of people use just one emailer. But where it starts to get really, really interesting is when you start getting into transactions. So I'll let you guys chat in the Zoom webinar chat about this, but if you can throw some examples about where money is coming into your organization from, I think we'll start to find that the amount of data coming in from different places is on the rise. We used to get by with direct mail and checks, and then some online giving came in, and we started doing some online giving via web forms and PayPal type things. But now a lot of organizations, yes, exactly, snail mail, all these things. Now a lot of organizations are starting to see significant revenue coming in from Apple Pay, from Amazon Payments, from third-party payment services that might be for over-the-top boxes. So when you order something, for example, on via your TV, you actually might be able to purchase subscriptions, memberships, etc., through that. And that is not going to route through your normal payment gateways. It just won't. It can't. You don't have the credit card data. You don't have the ability to do that. So suddenly reporting on transactions is no longer, you can't just go to your CRM and download a transaction list. You sometimes can't even go to your direct mail CRM and your online one and do it. You actually have to pull data in from 4 or 5 or 6 different giving sources to try to figure out how much money your organization is raising. And this is still getting, again, yeah, different foundations. There's mobile giving has become very big as well. So these are areas where we'd like to ignore it, and we'd like to hope that all this could be reported on out of a CRM that was built 30 years ago. But the harsh reality is many of these transactions, data coming in from Stripe, for example, or Stripe Connect, many of this money cannot be pushed into legacy CRMs, or if they can, only a minimal amount of data can be pushed in from there. So transaction reporting, donation reporting, giving reporting is a huge part of warehousing. So you can start pulling in data from your direct mail, from your mobile giving, from your email, from online, from over-the-top giving sources, from Twitch, if you start doing any fundraising on that. You can start pulling and reporting across all these different channels to get a good idea about how your overall view on reporting is. Our Frakture native transaction reports coming out of a Frakture warehouse are cross-channel native, meaning we're expecting to see 1, 2, 10 different channels of information. So all of our bots are channel savvy. They know where the money is coming from. They've got it all flagged and tagged in the system so that we're able to report across channel natively from a warehouse, no matter where that data comes in and no matter what you add in down the road. So there's a quick report here, just a quick snapshot of it. This is actually quite interactive. If I were doing a live demo, you could actually see some of the interactivity. And if we have time at the end, I might actually log in and show some of that. But yeah, so native reporting and transactions is quite big for us. Real quick, one of the challenges running a warehouse is keeping an eye on how up-to-date things are. We've heard this not just from our clients, but from groups doing warehousing as a whole. You might have a DBA on staff. You might have to say, you know, hey, Jimmy, did you run the updated revenue numbers so I can report this to the board? And he's got to go run something. So this idea of tracking how your data is moving around was key to some of our console work. Making sure, so with our console work, there's some small print here, but mostly what you're seeing is of the thousands of jobs that the bots are running, you can keep an eye on how much information was pulled out, when the data was updated, typically daily. Some of our groups like to have it more frequently, but so you can know and be confident that the data in the warehouse is as up to date as it can be, even though it might be coming from 10 or 20 different platforms and 10 or 20 different systems. So just a quick some information about that monitoring. This is what we keep an eye on, right? So our team on the back end, if Facebook updates its API, which they do all the time, it's our job, we'll note that, we'll see some errors in our monitoring, we'll track that, we'll go fix it, and typically we'll have a fix out within a day if we see an error coming from one of our outside systems. So that's what Frakture really does on our end, is we build bots and we monitor and track the status of them to make sure that they're pulling and pushing data consistently every day. We just got numbers for today. So today, for example, in the last 24 hours, we've run 30,000 jobs for our organizations. If you figure that's the equivalent of 20 minutes per job, that's about 10,000 man hours of work or woman hours of work done in the last 24 hours by our bots. This stuff takes a lot of time. And if you guys are in this call, you probably know how much time it can take to run all these automated processes. But what's exciting is that our bots are the ones doing the heavy lifting, and mostly we're tracking and monitoring, keeping an eye on them. One of the things in the console, one other portion of the console I won't dig too deep into, but we do have visibility into seeing every row, every record of data that's coming in, whether it be a data dictionary. In this case, this is one of our transaction data dictionaries. So you can see not just the data that's in there, but also add documentation, add field information. So your warehouse becomes less of just a data store and more of a repository of knowledge that might cross different departments. So understanding how your source codes work is a very common use case where for a data dictionary, where given a source code, you know the campaign, the channel it went out on, the date it went out, then its performance. Some of the raw data dictionary and source code dictionaries is where a lot of our work is. I can cover a little bit more on that if we want to in Q&A, but mostly the console exists so you can see all this and interact with this data at all time. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes on third-party reporting suites. It's a fairly common use case of warehousing as a whole, and I think it warrants a few minutes of discussion. In the chat, go ahead and list if you guys are using a third-party reporting suite. I'm going to mention some here. We have our preference, but we're fairly agnostic as Frakture. The world is starting to get to a spot where your reporting suite of record is independent of the database you're using, which is independent of the platforms you're using. So this kind of warehouse theme, Power BI is a very common one. I note that. Google Data Studio is good. Slemma is another common one we've seen. Tableau, if you're probably familiar with. These are all suites of tools that are awesome at pie charts and graphs and time charts and all these different ways of viewing data. And it has Domo is a popular one as well. So Domo is an interesting one. I'll comment real quickly on Domo. Domo started out as a dashboarding software and has a fantastic way to build custom dashboards. They're starting to become a little more generic now in the reporting tool arena. But they're getting, a lot of folks are starting to catch up on some of the interface work. Domo is still fairly strong in the data parsing and pulling data out of proprietary systems worlds. But yes, Domo absolutely qualifies because you can plug it into a warehouse and it works great. What you're seeing here, this is just a Google Data Studio report. But the key element of a third-party reporting suite is it can be tweaked and customized to what an agency or an organization needs specifically for that organization. So whether it be departments, codes, campaigns, etc., this is all information that can be tweaked in a way that standard interfaces cannot. So this is one of the values of separating your warehouse and your data from your interfaces. And we know that at Frakture. Even though we have our console, we don't think that our console is going to be the end-all be-all reporting suite for everybody. In fact, we know it's not. So what we'll typically do is work with an organization and separate out the data, which is the quality of data, the columns, the rows, maybe even some performance elements of it, from the reporting side itself, where the reporting side is the charts, the graphs, the sums, the aggregates, etc. By separating those, at Frakture, we can focus on making sure that your data is killer and consistent across all your platforms, and agencies and organizations can focus on how they want to view into that data, how they want to see that data. There's some discussion that sometimes happens, but we try at Frakture to structure our data in such a way that it's easy to use for a third-party reporting suite, easy to use for organizations to kind of tweak and customize it. And sometimes we'll have a discussion about adding fields and columns, but that separation becomes fairly useful from an organization perspective, because they can also use that reporting suite to report on other bits of data that may not be in their warehouse. The warehouse is usually the best place to keep it, as it's one spot, but if you do want to report on things outside of it, like for example, if you have a Google sheet or something else where other data is in, you can use a reporting suite to report on that information as well. So this is an example of cross-channel giving. So you can actually see that there's multiple campaigns and channels. Well, the example here doesn't have a good one, but in the scrolling down on this, you can actually see money coming in from multiple channels across an organization that's raising millions of dollars a year. This is a common scenario that historically has been very hard to report on with traditional CRM reporting. But if you engage the power of a modern reporting suite with quality data, you can finally get the reports updated daily with no human effort that you need. So that's kind of the third-party reporting suite, bots for the data, and a warehouse as the repository. That's kind of becoming a fairly a good way to accommodate the diverse needs of organizations. Here's another one. Here's a custom email report. This is actually just an email report that somebody's going using. I think this might be Tableau, actually. I can't remember. But again, just again, another example of reporting on email with a third-party reporting suite. As you know, some people care about different parts of email. Some people care about opens and clicks. Some people might care about actions. Some people care about things like clicks divided by opens and other such custom ratios. This is where reporting suites are useful in addition to standard reports from our console. But again, they can work hand in hand. You don't have to choose one or the other. In fact, a lot of our groups use both, because at the end of the day, the data is consistent and standard in the warehouse. Comment on Looker. Yep, so Looker is a reporting suite that combines user interfaces with some custom scripting, so custom scripts that you can write to dig into that data. Looker's fairly commonly used. It's a pretty big company. I can't remember if they're public now, but they're very, it's a good tool set. A lot of folks will use it for building custom reporting out of databases. I think they try to go a little wide scoped. So like they'll try to go into analytics as well as just pure reporting. One of the challenges we've seen with something like Looker is it's fairly easy to write a query that clobbers your database. Whereas you can actually, using some of the Looker script or whatever it's called, you can write a join query that joins across 8 tables and effectively brings down your database. Some of the newer tools like Google Data Studio have some controls against that. That said, we're agnostic. I actually don't care. I've seen fantastic work done with Looker. I would say that the main thing we try and focus groups on is making sure that the quality of data that you're pulling from is good. Right, and that doesn't mean that you can pull natively from Salesforce. That's a very different question. The question is whether or not you can get it into a set of rows and columns and tables that are high performing, fast, and can report on in a realistic time frame out of it, whether you're using Looker or Data Studio, et cetera. I can chat offline a little bit more about some of our preferences on this. Frakture as a whole is fairly agnostic. We think that if you've got a warehouse, you've got the chops to use it, plug in 15 tools, right? So because of that comment, also comment one other thing. So we have some data scientists also who work with Frakture, because not just reporting, sometimes you as a data scientist don't want to spend your time pulling data, right? At the end of the day, I've heard some folks say that getting good quality data is like 90% of a data scientist's day job. I can't speak to the accuracy of that, but in some of my experience with it, that tends to be very, very heavy, going and getting the source data, cleaning it, formatting it, etc. So a lot of what data scientists work with automation for is to try to get data into clean, standardized format so they can run their models and spend their time modeling, spend their time doing advanced queries on the data, and not trying to figure out whether the timestamp is correct on a date or on a donation. So that was maybe a little longer on kind of Looker stuff, but it does branch a little bit into warehousing and what you would like to push into your warehouse is up to you. I meant to mention this at the beginning, but you guys might already have a warehouse. Even if you're not using Frakture, if you have a DBA on staff, you have a warehouse. Effectively, they have a sandbox, a playground, a place they pull and push data to. They might not be using it for a lot of the things you can use it for, but if you have a DBA or a data scientist, you undoubtedly have a warehouse. At Frakture, we don't care if you use our warehousing. We warehouse stuff for free, or a third-party warehouse. We plug into everything from Postgres through MySQL, through Aurora, through SQL Server, through Redshift. If you name it, we can generally plug into it as the repository, the warehouse of record. At Frakture, we're not about owning data. We're more about the piping and wiring of it. But for some of the more advanced folks on the call, if you have a SQL database, yes, it's a warehouse, and yes, we can push data into it. A lot of data scientists find that particular bit useful. So I'll wrap real quick and get to some Q&A bits. So one of the things is, so what's next, right? So maybe folks on the call are already our clients. Great, hi to see you. Nice to see you. We'll reach out to you guys, or you can reach out to us about getting you access to your console. You already have one. We just have to get you logged in and familiar with it, whether that be another on-point training or whether it's just getting you a login. We can get our agency work as well. So if you guys do work with a digital agency, we work with a number of groups across, especially the DC area. Reach out to your agency. You might already be working with us. A lot of our work we work with through our agencies. That might be the way to reach out to us. Otherwise, just ping us and we can chat with you. There you go. We were going to be launching some more reporting suites in our console. So the next couple months of us for development is deploying to our existing client base, getting feedback. This is a version 1.0 launch. So as we launch, we expect we'll get some feedback from clients about other things they would like to see. We expect to add in more work on some source code dictionaries, again, some more standard reports. And whatever our clients request of us. So we're pretty responsive to organizations. And finally, we are going to be at an N10 conference next week, so starting on Tuesday. So if anyone's going to be out there, we would love to meet up with you guys and demo the console, see information, get any more information about warehousing and bots, etc. Okay. So that concludes our regularly scheduled program. We can now kick into any amount of questions. I'm happy to dig into any other reporting suites, et cetera, or some feedback on that, or into any other areas. So I'll let you guys pause for a second, and I'll have a drink, and you guys can throw some questions up. Okay, we got in a question about data security, personally identifiable information. We have groups that do both anonymized data in a warehouse as well as unanonymized data. So what you elect to put into your warehouse is fairly up to you. Again, we do work with, we can anonymize data on the way out of a CRM so that the warehouse never actually sees name information, address information, et cetera. In some cases, if you're doing data cleaning, it's necessary. It's hard to clean the first name if you can't read the first name. But in most cases, it's up to groups whether you want to bring in PII into the warehouse. On that note, I did mention you're welcome to host your own warehouse. We don't care if that's an issue at your organization, and you want to make sure that you keep your data within your walls. We can accommodate that, and we'll actually push data to you. Even if you're behind a firewall, we have mechanisms whereby we can actually run bots behind a firewall. So some of our organizations are hospitals, so our bots actually, the data never leaves their firewall. We have bots running internally to their organization. Adobe Campaigns, we don't have a bot yet for Adobe Campaigns. We're familiar with it though. So that was another question that popped up. It is a good question. Bots, we can typically roll out between 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity of the bot, whether there's an available API, and we'll tend to prioritize bots that are widely used. Adobe Campaign falls under that, as do most social media services. If it's a legacy 30-year-old CRM, we'll probably discuss with you other ways to get the data out other than a bot. But again, we have about 130 bots and we're putting them out all the time. So it's Adobe Campaign is a good example of one we don't have, but would be happy to start spinning up. So we can have a conversation about that. Okay, so that's a little bit on PII. Again, Ashley's on the chat and we'll have contact information after this. So if you guys want to reach out for any specific questions about privacy, et cetera, we can go from that. Okay. Okay, then it's about 1:40 or so, so I'll give you guys back about 5 or 10 minutes of your day. We're going to wrap it up here. If you want to reach out, actually, I don't have a reach out slide. I don't have a reach out slide, but you can reach me at chris@frakture.com or Ashley, who's also in the chat. Ashley, can you just chat your contact info? Ashley will chat the contact information. You'll also see in the chat a link to our N10 session. We're doing an N10 session with one of our organizations, one of our agencies, discussing the concept of warehousing and how to implement it at your organization. Again, reach out to your agency or directly to us, and we can follow up with any specific questions. Ashley also points out that we're going to have a N10 party on Thursday, next Thursday, and we tend to throw good parties. So we'd love to have you guys there enjoying a beer with us as well. With that, I'll call it a wrap, and thank you all for your time.